Okay, thank you, Chair. And again, I just also want to say, absolutely, I think it's so important that people hear your stories, and I think that's how you make change. And I'm a firm believer that it's like what Kathleen has said, that if you actually don't tell your story, because there's other people out there that have similar stories and they're actually not coming out and saying it. And I'm a firm believer the only way to make change is always by awareness and letting people know, and it isn't easy. And I think the stories today here have absolutely been emotional. We're all affected by it and truthful. And I think that the thing about it is the respect today here for the surrogacy, for for everybody working together, for communication. And I absolutely have to say, we come to a lot of meetings now, but today has really been mind-blowing. So my questions would be, I mean, because everybody, I think we're also affected by it, but we've spoke about, I suppose, children's allowance, for example, and we speak about maternity benefits and medical needs, because that is part of moving forward. Because I know myself, I have 4 children, now they're rare at this stage, but I mean the cost of it, and it's the cost of everyday living, and it is an issue where we need to address. So where do you find solutions, or where do you think we can make this change in this legislation on benefits like maternity benefits, medical benefits, things that are a child's entitlement? I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about children here, babies, that are entitled to this. It's their given right. And we cannot, as a society, stand over something that they are actually not getting. And that is something that we need to address here today, that we need to make sure that no child is in any position that they're absolutely not part of our community, not part of the school community, not part of society, because they feel that they are a different family. And that's the change that we need to make. So maybe you could, maybe just something maybe where you feel it could be a small change, but one of the I think over the years, and all of us have learned it, is it's actually not until you're in a position in life and you're faced with these realities that you learn a lot and that you can make that change. And I'm a firm believer in that. The other thing I feel, and has come up at a few of our meetings, is counselling. I feel that that's going to be play a huge part going forward for for everybody, in the sense of children, adults, the different age groups for children, and when they come to maybe different I suppose parts of their life, which is so important. Maybe there might be areas there too that you might come back to us with some of maybe solutions, because we're here today to legislate, to make sure we have a law to regulate and get this through for the children that ye are speaking, the children that need us, and that's what we need to do. So I want to, that's the other thing. Now, I know that passports has come up, and as you know, at the moment there's a huge delay in passports, but particularly for children's passports. And another area I feel that needs to be addressed, particularly for people maybe that have gone to Ukraine or maybe had to go to other countries, that we need to look at some sort of a solution here. And I know yesterday we had some speakers in, and it was about England and about some of the surrogacy there to do with England and regulations there. And I know one of it was said that the surrogacy mother would go on the birth cert first, and then of course there would be what would be called a parental order, and then it would be with the mother would of the child would go on it as well. Now I do understand, look, I would be all for, as we have said today, and I want to compliment you on this, about having communication, having photographs, having telephone calls, having meetings, because that's so important, that we know there has to be communication on all sides, and there has to be, maybe like England have a register, I believe. Do you believe that we should look at a register here in Ireland as well? Because we can't give out the information that, oh, there's no point of contact. There will always be contact, and and that's so important for all of us. So these are the other things that I would I feel is so important, and I can't let go, Ciara, without mentioning you, because I know Ciara, and we spoke about Carlo, which is my own, I'm very proud, and as you all know, anyone knows, I'm a Carlo woman, and one of the I would actually know some of the families personally, and I know particularly the lady, and I'm sure she won't mention her name, when she rang me that day that she had brought her son for his 6-month checkup, or 6-week checkup. She wasn't allowed to go in with that child. I was absolutely floored. Now, she was devastated. She was actually crying when she rang me, because her mother is my best friend. So that's and I couldn't believe it. I was floored. She's an excellent mother. She has the most beautiful son you ever came across, like your own children. And I can see it today, how proud you are, all speaking of your children. And absolutely. And then again, my other friend, Sarah, where she herself had to sit outside in the car park. Her husband went into the hospital because her child was sick. She couldn't go in and sit with her child. Oh my God, I thought, I just think it's not right. And this is why we have to now make sure that we have proper legislation that's fair, inclusive, and that, and that's what you're looking for here today. You are looking to make it inclusive. You are looking for all of the, and it's great to see, as Selena said, people that think alike, people that are in a situation. And I want to thank Selena too, because I know we've had we have heard from Selena, excellent as well. But I think it's great because one of the things that really moved me today was that everybody here had their own story. And everybody's story is so personal, and everybody is in their own family unit, and you're fighting to protect what you have. And you know what? That's really honourable and well done, and maybe you'll come back to me with answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. I should have said as well, if people want to direct, because we do have quite a lot of witnesses, or else if people maybe can just indicate, maybe not everyone needs to come in on every question, if you know what I mean. So who wants to
field the question first and pass on to my colleagues, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Deputy O'Connor, and for your questions and for your observations on this morning's testimony. In terms of your first question around what can you do, I mean, public policy and department operations are all informed by legislation. If the legislation isn't there, they can't do it, and that's what they lean on. So in terms of things like medical or children's allowance, maternity benefits, medical needs, the change has to start with legislation, in my view. As Garrod has mentioned, there are workarounds in some departments and not in others. You're really dependent on attitudes and I suppose the compassion of public servants in some of those situations. In terms of your question around the national register, there was a precedent set with the Children and Family Relationships Act around a national donor register. There's a proposal for a surrogacy register in the AHR bill. We are all completely in agreement with that. We are all completely in agreement that children born through assisted human reproduction should have access to their genetic heritage and identifiable information where at all possible. So there is no member here who wouldn't agree with that. I'll let some of my colleagues come in on particular challenges around passports and medical issues as well. I would say around your question around counselling and what can you do, I think it's really important to recognise that there are lifelong impacts for people, and a public funding model for medical treatment and counselling would be very welcomed across the board. And in terms, I'd just like to make a final point around those situations you described, like one of your constituents in the car park, and we hear those stories every single day, and we experience those stories where you and your family are in incredibly vulnerable situations, relying on the kindness and compassion of professionals and relying on them to take professional risks because they are not protected by the legislation to vaccinate your child if you're not technically deemed their legal parent, to allow you go through border control with your child to travel on holidays. They are not technically protected by that. And we are reliant on those kindness. And in majority of cases, people are kind and are compassionate. But we are left in incredibly vulnerable situations, and with the fear and worry that one of those situations could turn into a very negative experience very quickly. Being denied medical intervention, being denied travel, a child's being taken away. Like these are where these things can escalate to, and without the kindness and compassion and professional risk being taken by those civil servants. So I would ask you also to protect civil servants who are being compassionate and kind, and to back them up. I'll hand you over to my colleague Claire, who wants to talk to some of those points as well.
Thanks, Elaine. And thank you, Senator, for the Deputy, for the question. Good start. I just wanted to come in on the first point, basically, of how do you apply this situation to all the various areas, medical treatment, social welfare, all that kind of thing. I think a very simple solution is essentially that once a person is named a parent, and to make that pathway to a parent, that you would have a provision that is currently in the draft legislation at the moment, that essentially any enactment that refers to a mother, a father, a parent includes a person who is named in that parental order. So it's kind of a wide sweep that it'll include anybody. So it's kind of a simple enough solution. The next thing I just wanted to mention about counselling, because it is so important, you know, when it goes to the, I suppose, the ethical nature of surrogacy, and as well, something that kind of comes across in the 2022 bill is that the child's right to identity is so important, but something that's lacking very much is counselling for that child when they are notified. So it's obviously the origins of a child, it'll be disclosed to them by the parent, you know, first and foremost. It'll be their kind of the doorway, I suppose. But second of all, the provisions at the moment in the 2015 Act and the 2022 bill, as it is now, is that essentially a child may apply for their birth certificate at some point, and at that point they will be notified that there is an entry about them in the National Surrogacy Register. That's how they find out, you know. So it's from an office, you know, and it's I don't know, it might be by letter or something, but there's no provision for I suppose inserting or making sure that counselling is then available to that child, or it's promoted, or a referral mechanism is included in the process of notifying them, you know. And sorry, just one other thing that I want to mention is in relation to passports. Obviously the weight there is quite a problem. And again, a reference to a parent will be inserted into the Passport Act 2008. But one thing that's concerning, particularly in the area of international surrogacy, is that a child won't be registered in the Irish Register of Births. They'll be registered in the Foreign Births Register. And there's a backlog at the moment, it has on their website, of 2 years. And so that's a considerable problem that I think needs to be tackled in some way. Yeah. So thank you so much, Gareth.
Thank you. Gareth,
I just had a brief contribution in relation to your question around counselling. So as I mentioned in my speech, we undertook our initial surrogacy journey in Canada, where counselling is required for all the participants, the donor, the surrogate, and the intended parents. And there is a prescribed set of sessions that must actually take place for each of the parties, dealing with the key issues that will arise. So, for example, for the intended parents, how will you work through IVF and the strain and stress that will cause on your relationship? How will you cope with telling your friends and families about the child that might be about to arrive? How will you cope with introducing your child to the community where you live? For the surrogate, there's a similar set of core sessions that must take place. And then depending on what is unearthed within those sessions, further sessions may be arranged. As Claire has touched upon, I mean, for children as they go through life, they are going to be treated and looked at in a different way, particularly if they have same-sex parents potentially. And we as parents are thinking about and working through, you know, what type of counselling might be needed for them. But to summarise my point, I think counselling and advice, whether it be psychological or medical advice for all the parties, is absolutely vital, because we thought we knew loads about being parents. How naive are we before the kids were born? The counselling sessions unearthed for us so many conversations between us and initiated so many conversations between us and our surrogate mother. They were absolutely vital. In terms of contact with the surrogate, you asked about that idea. Our experience in Canada was that we were required to create a contract with the surrogate mother, a legally binding contract, and to discuss all issues pertaining to the journey, preconception, during pregnancy and post-birth. And the level of contact that would be agreed between the parties was actually written into the contract.
Okay.
When we went to the UK, it was a personal arrangement. We had no requirement to make a contract, and in fact we weren't allowed to do so under UK law because the surrogate mother was the legal mother, and therefore we didn't have any right to create a contract that would contradict that. But we actually did create an agreement with her. Even though she was a friend, we wanted to discuss all the permutations and combinations, and we did actually insert in that agreement what contact would look like post-birth. And we've actually gone and beyond at the agreement of all parties. the terms of that contract by actually doing lots more than we ever envisaged in terms of meeting up, in terms of having her involvement in our children's life and story.